The 68-year-old veteran was drowning in the dark waters of the South Carolina Lowcountry, his body pulled under by an unseen force. His loyal German Shepherd, Captain, was swimming desperately toward him, but the distance was too great, the current too strong. This was supposed to be a peaceful morning, a quiet sunrise over the marsh where Colonel William Brennan had come to scatter the last of his wife's ashes and finally say goodbye. But then, 15 feet away, a massive 12-foot alligator surfaced, and what it did next defied everything we know about predators. The reptile's yellow eyes locked onto the drowning man, not with hunger, but with something that looked almost like recognition. Will's vision blurred as water filled his lungs. The trap's iron teeth ground deeper into his calf, the hidden chain pulling him down with merciless efficiency. Captain's frantic barking echoed across the water, growing more distant as consciousness began to slip away. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 days before the drowning, Colonel William Brennan woke at precisely 0600 hours, just as he had for the past 40 years. Old habits from military life never died. They just became the skeleton that held a man together when everything else crumbled away. He sat on the edge of his bed, his hand instinctively reaching toward the empty side where Margaret used to sleep. 2 years gone, but the ache remained fresh every morning, a wound that refused to heal. A wet nose nudged his palm. Captain, his 11-year-old German Shepherd, looked up at him with those deep brown eyes that seemed to understand everything Will couldn't say aloud. The dog's muzzle had gone silver with age, and he moved a bit slower these days, but his devotion hadn't dimmed one bit. "Morning, boy," Will murmured, scratching behind the dog's graying ears. Ready for patrol, he shuffled to the kitchen of his small cabin on the Edisto River, the South Carolina Lowcountry spreading out beyond his windows like a painting Margaret used to love. Spanish moss hung from ancient oak trees, and the morning light filtered through in golden shafts. Will made 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for the photo of Margaret on the counter. It was a ritual he couldn't break, didn't want to break. The walls told the story of his losses in careful arrangement. Margaret's smile frozen in their wedding photo. Their son Michael, sharp in his army uniform, taken 6 months before the IED in Afghanistan had taken him 5 years ago. Michael's funeral flag hung in a frame, the fabric faded from the sun that streamed through the window each morning. Will's hands trembled as he lifted his coffee cup, not from age, but from the dreams. Last night, he'd been back in Fallujah, hearing screams he couldn't silence, seeing faces he couldn't save. Captain moved closer, pressing his warm body against Will's leg. The dog always knew. That's why the VA had suggested a service dog after Michael's death, but Will hadn't needed their training program. He and Captain had found each other when they both needed saving most. Captain had been Michael's dog, sent home just weeks before that final mission. The dog was Michael's last gift, though Will hadn't understood that at first. "You saved me, boy," Will whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Every damn day, you save me." He looked at the stack of bills on the table. Medical debt from Margaret's cancer treatment, a mountain of numbers that felt like another enemy he couldn't defeat. Beside them, the bank's letter. 48 hours to pay or lose the property. Margaret had made him promise to keep this land wild, to protect it. But how could he keep a promise to a dead woman when the living world demanded its pound of flesh? The envelope appeared on Will's porch that afternoon like a ghost's accusation. No postmark, no return address, just his name written in angry block letters. His hands shook as he tore it open, Captain whining softly at his feet as if sensing the threat before Will even read the words. "Colonel Brennan, your son didn't die a hero. He died because you taught him to worship war. You sent him to die. And now you'll pay. You have 48 hours to leave this land, or you'll lose more than property. Someone who knows the truth." The paper fluttered from Will's fingers. His vision tunneled, and suddenly he wasn't on his porch anymore. He was back in the desert, watching the explosion bloom orange and black, hearing Michael's name crackle over the radio. His chest tightened, breath coming in sharp gasps. PTSD didn't ask permission. It just took you. Captain pressed against him immediately, the dog's training kicking in. Will sank to his knees, burying his face in the shepherd's thick fur, trying to anchor himself to something real, something present. "Did I?" he whispered into Captain's neck. "Did I push him to die?" The memory came unbidden. 18-year-old Michael at the kitchen table, eyes bright with youth and certainty. "Dad, I want to make you proud. I want to serve like you did." And Will, puffed up with fatherly pride, had said, "Son, there's no greater honor than serving your country." He could still hear Margaret's voice, gentler, more cautious. "Will, don't push him. Let him choose." But Will had been so certain, so proud. Now Michael was in the ground, and Will carried the weight of wondering if his words had put him there. The rumble of an engine pulled Will back to the present. An older pickup truck rolled up his dirt driveway, dust trailing behind it like a funeral procession. Will recognized the bumper sticker before he recognized the driver, Gold Star Family. His gut tightened. Raymond Sutton climbed out slowly, favoring his left leg. The IED from Iraq had left him with a limp and a purple heart. Behind him, a woman in her late 30s emerged from the passenger side, her face drawn with exhaustion. 2 children waited in the back seat. "Ray Sutton," Will said, his voice flat. "Been 30 years." "Hello, Will." Ray's voice carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. "Wish this was a friendly visit." They'd served together in the Gulf War, back when they were young men who thought they understood sacrifice. They'd lost touch after, lives diverging, until their sons brought them back into each other's orbit. Michael Brennan and Jacob Sutton, best friends since basic training, had deployed together to Afghanistan. They'd died together too, in the same explosion, 5 years ago. "I'm here about your land," Ray said. "I need it, Will. It's not for sale, you know that." Ray's jaw worked, his eyes going distant. "You don't understand. I need it. For Jacob. For my boy." His voice cracked on his son's name. "I want to build a memorial for the fallen, a place where families can come, where we can honor them properly, where their names aren't just carved on some distant wall nobody visits." The woman, Ray's daughter, Will realized, stepped forward. "Dad, we talked about this." Ray ignored her, his desperation bleeding through. "Will, I lost everything after Jacob died. The house, the savings, my wife." He paused, and Will saw the shimmer of tears. Sarah couldn't handle it. The grief was too much. She took pills 2 years ago, left Elena here with 2 kids and no mother. Will's heart clenched. He understood that particular devastation, understood how grief could hollow you out until there was nothing left but the need to make meaning from the meaningless. "Ray, I'm sorry for your loss," Will said carefully. "God knows I understand, but Margaret wanted this land protected. I made her a promise." Ray's face hardened, grief transforming into something sharper, more dangerous. "Margaret's dead, Will. Promises to dead people don't mean shit." Will flinched as if struck. "You know what I think?" Ray continued, his voice rising. "I think you feel guilty. I think you know you're the reason our boys are dead. You glorified military life. You made it seem heroic. Jacob wanted to be like Michael. Michael wanted to be like you. You sent them both to die. Ray, that's not fair." "Fair?" Ray's laugh was bitter. "My boy is in the ground because yours wanted to play hero. And your boy is dead because you taught him that dying for country is noble." Elena grabbed her father's arm. "Dad, please, we should go." But Ray pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. "I got an offer here from a developer. $500,000 for this land. We split it. $250 for you, $250 for my memorial. Everybody wins." "No." Ray's eyes went cold. "Then I'll take it another way. You got 48 hours, Will. Make the right choice, or lose everything. Again." That night, Will couldn't sleep. The anonymous letter sat on his kitchen table like a ticking bomb, and Ray's words echoed in his skull. "You sent them both to die. At 0200 hours, he gave up on rest and reached for Margaret's diary, the one she'd kept during her final year. He read it every night, a ritual of remembrance and pain. Tonight, his trembling fingers found an entry he'd somehow missed before, tucked near the back, dated a week before she'd died. I visited Sarah Sutton today, Ray's wife. She's broken, shattered into pieces I don't think anyone can put back together. Jacob's death destroyed her. I brought food, paid some bills Will doesn't know about. He'd insist on doing more if he knew, but he's barely holding himself together. Sarah cried in my arms for an hour. She told me Ray blames Will for everything. I tried to tell her, war kills boys, not fathers. But grief doesn't listen to reason. It just screams and screams until there's nothing left but the screaming. I'm afraid of what Ray might do. Will doesn't know I've been helping them. Maybe I should tell him, but he's so fragile since Michael died. He wakes up gasping every night, reaching for something he can't name. I'm dying, and I know it, and my biggest fear isn't death, it's leaving him alone. Will's vision blurred. Margaret had been carrying this secret, trying to bridge the chasm between their families while cancer ate her alive. She'd known about Ray's hatred, had tried to heal it with quiet kindness while Will remained oblivious. She'd been protecting him even as she'd been dying. The sob that tore from his chest seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs. Captain was there instantly, climbing onto the bed despite his arthritis, laying his full weight across Will's chest. The pressure helped, the warmth helped, the simple fact of not being alone helped. I'm drowning, Cap, Will whispered into the dog's fur. I'm drowning, and I don't know how to swim anymore. He made a decision then, in the dark hours before dawn. Tomorrow he would walk to the river, to the spot where Margaret used to sit with her sketchbook. He'd scatter the last of her ashes there, the small amount he'd kept in a separate urn, unable to let go completely. Maybe then he could forgive himself. Maybe then he could face whatever came next. Morning arrived too quickly. Will was on the porch with his coffee when Eleanor Sutton's car pulled up alone, without her father. She approached slowly, hesitantly, like someone walking toward her own execution. "Colonel Brennan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" "Ma'am." Eleanor's composure shattered. "I'm so sorry. About yesterday. About the letter." Will's head snapped up. "Letter?" The confession poured out of her in a torrent. She'd written the anonymous letter, not her father. Ray didn't even know about it. She'd thought if she could guilt Will into selling, she could get the money her family desperately needed without her father resorting to violence or threats. She was a single mother with 2 children, and her 6-year-old daughter had leukemia. The experimental treatment her insurance wouldn't cover cost $200,000. "I'm a terrible person," Eleanor sobbed. "Your wife was so kind to my mom. She visited when everyone else gave up. She paid bills, brought food, just sat with her. And I tried to manipulate you with your son's death. I'm disgusting." "Your daughter," Will managed. "What's her name?" Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Margaret. I named her Margaret, after your wife." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, showing Will a photo of a little girl with a bright smile and no hair, her small, bald head covered in colorful temporary tattoos. "Mrs. Brennan gave my mom 6 more months of not being alone. When my daughter was born, I wanted to honor that kindness." Will stared at the photo of little Margaret, the second Margaret in his life, though he'd never known she existed. This tiny fighter bearing his wife's name, facing death at 6 years old while her mother made desperate, terrible choices out of love. "Dad doesn't know I wrote the letter," Eleanor continued. "He just knows he's losing his mind with grief. He's not evil, Colonel. He's just broken, like all of us." She stood, wiping her eyes. "I came to tell you the truth, and to say, don't sell. Mrs. Brennan wanted this land wild. Honor her. I'll find another way to save my daughter." After she left, Will sat motionless on his porch for an hour. Ray hadn't sent the letter. Ray hadn't known about the cruelest blow. Eleanor was a good person, driven to bad acts by a mother's desperation. Little Margaret, Margaret's namesake, was dying. And somewhere in all this mess, there had to be a way forward that didn't require anyone else to drown. He packed a small backpack that afternoon, Margaret's ashes urn, Michael's dog tags that he wore under his shirt, the funeral flag from Michael's coffin folded in his jacket. Tomorrow at sunrise, he'd perform his own private ceremony at the river. Maybe the water would give him answers. Maybe it would just take him under. Either way, he'd find out soon enough. Captain wouldn't leave his side all evening, pressing close, whining softly. The dog knew something was coming. Animals always did. Dawn broke over the South Carolina low country at 5:45 a.m., painting the marsh in shades of gold and amber that Margaret would have loved. Will stepped out of his cabin with Captain at his side, the backpack heavy on his shoulders with the weight of memory and ash. The August air was thick and warm, carrying the scent of salt water and wild things. Egrets stalked through the shallows, their white forms ghostly in the morning mist. Will talked to the urn in his backpack as they walked the familiar path along the Edisto River. "I'm sorry I couldn't save our boy, Mags. Sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I'm failing at everything you asked." His voice cracked on the words. Michael's dog tags clinked softly under his shirt with each step, and the funeral flag was tucked carefully in his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Captain limped beside him, his arthritis worse in the morning, but the old German shepherd refused to be left behind. His ears swiveled constantly, alert to every sound, every shift in the wind. The dog had been acting strange all night, pressing close, whining, as if he sensed something coming that Will couldn't see. They followed the path Will had walked 1,000 times, the path where he'd taught Michael to swim when the boy was 6, laughing and splashing in the shallows, the path where Margaret had sat with her watercolors, trying to capture the way light moved through Spanish moss, the path where they'd scattered most of her ashes 2 years ago, watching them drift away on the current like prayers. Will's mind drifted to a memory from 15 years earlier, so vivid it felt like yesterday. He'd found a baby alligator tangled in abandoned fishing net, no more than 2 feet long, thrashing weakly. The creature's leg had been badly infected, where the nylon had cut deep into flesh. Margaret had wanted to call wildlife rescue, but Will had seen the severity of the infection. There wasn't time. He'd brought the tiny reptile home, cleaned the wound, administered antibiotics from his own medical kit, and tended it for 3 weeks. Margaret had been the one to carve a small V-shaped notch in its snout before they released it back into the river. "So we'll recognize her if we ever see her again," she'd explained, always thinking ahead, always marking the things she loved. They'd named the alligator Moses, saved from the water, like the biblical baby in the basket. "Margaret always saved things," Will murmured to Captain as they walked. "Birds with broken wings, turtles caught in trash, alligators, me." He paused, his throat tight. "Who's going to save me now that she's gone?" Captain pressed against his leg, a warm, solid presence that said, "I'm here. I'm still here." They reached the spot, the fallen cypress tree stretching out into the water, worn smooth by decades of weather and hands. This was where Margaret had loved to sit, her sketchbook in her lap, her bare feet dangling in the water. This was sacred ground. Will knelt at the water's edge, setting down his backpack. His hands shook as he pulled out the small urn containing the last of Margaret's ashes. He'd kept these back, unable to let go completely, clinging to dust because it was all he had left. But Elena's words echoed in his mind. Honor her. Do what she would have wanted. "Margaret," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I tried to keep your promise about the land. I tried to stay alive for you. But I'm so tired. I'm drowning on dry land, and I don't know how to make it stop." Captain suddenly stiffened beside him, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Will looked up, following the dog's gaze toward the water. Something metallic gleamed just beneath the surface, half hidden by reeds in the shallows. His military training kicked in. Wrong, that's wrong. That shouldn't be there. "What is it, boy?" Will set down the urn and stood slowly, his knees protesting. He took a step closer to investigate, squinting against the glare of morning sun on water. Captain barked frantically, a sound of pure alarm. "Easy, Cap." Will took another step. The ground gave way beneath his right foot. It wasn't natural erosion. Someone had dug a hidden hole in the mud, disguised it, waited for exactly this moment. Will's leg plunged down into 18 inches of water and straight into the jaws of a trap. The sound of metal snapping shut was obscenely loud in the quiet morning. Rusty iron teeth clamped through his calf, grinding against bone. Pain exploded white-hot through his nervous system. Will screamed, a sound he didn't recognize as his own, and fell sideways into deeper water. His backpack dragged him down. Margaret's ashes sank with him. The river closed over his head, cold and dark and utterly indifferent to his suffering. Panic overrode training. Will thrashed, trying to surface, trying to get his bearings. His hands found the trap on his leg and followed the mechanism down. Chain. There was a chain attached to the trap, bolted to something heavy on the river bottom, and as he struggled, pulling and twisting, he felt the chain drawing tighter through some kind of pulley system. The more he fought, the deeper it pulled him. This wasn't a poacher's trap. This was designed to drown someone. This was designed to drown him. Someone had set this for him specifically. Ray, Elena, someone else who wanted him gone. The betrayal cut deeper than the metal teeth in his flesh. Blood clouded the water around him, dark and spreading. Will's lungs burned. He broke the surface, gasping, coughing, and saw Captain on the bank, pacing frantically, barking with a desperation Will had never heard from the old dog. "Go!" Will shouted, water filling his mouth. "Get help! Go home!" Captain was trained for this. Trained to run for help when his handler was down. Trained to fetch emergency services. But the dog didn't move, didn't run, just stood there barking, torn between obedience and something deeper. Will's head went under again. He fought back to the surface, his strength already failing. The trap was merciless. The chain was tightening, and his blood was painting the river red. "Captain, go!" But even as he gave the command, Will understood with terrible clarity what was about to happen. Captain wasn't going to leave. The dog was going to stay, going to try to save him, and they were both going to die in this river. "No," Will sobbed, his voice breaking. "No, please, Cap. You have to—" Captain launched himself into the water. The German shepherd hit the river with a splash, his powerful legs churning, swimming straight for Will with single-minded determination. Despite his age, despite his arthritis, despite 11 years of accumulated wear and tear, Captain swam like he was young again, like he was on a mission that mattered more than his own survival. "You stupid, loyal—" Will's words dissolved into choking as he went under again. When he surfaced, Captain was there, his jaws clamping onto Will's collar with the precise grip of a trained service dog. The shepherd's eyes met his. No fear in them, no regret, only love and absolute commitment. Captain's jaws held firm on Will's collar, pulling with everything he had. The old dog's legs churned the water rhythmically, keeping Will's head above the surface, but it wasn't enough. The trap's chain pulled relentlessly downward, creating a grotesque tug-of-war with Will's body as the rope. Blood continued to spread through the water in dark, billowing clouds. Will wrapped one arm around Captain's neck, trying not to pull the dog under with him, trying to help him stay afloat. But the effort was useless. Will outweighed the shepherd by nearly 100 pounds. And the 40-pound iron trap added its own cruel mathematics to the equation. They were locked in a death spiral, circling slowly as the current pushed them downstream and the chain pulled them down. "Let go, Cap," Will gasped between mouthfuls of river water. "Let me go. Save yourself." But Captain's jaws only tightened on the collar. The dog would drown before he released his grip. Will could see it in those brown eyes, the same stubborn devotion Michael had possessed, the same unwillingness to leave a man behind that had gotten his son killed. Will's vision began to tunnel. The pain in his leg had become distant, muted, as his body started to shut down from blood loss and shock. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in combat, not from old age, but drowning in the river where he'd taught his son to swim, where he'd scattered his wife's ashes, dragged down by a trap set by someone who wanted him erased from the earth. They went under together. The water was dark and cold, muffling everything. Will's lungs screamed for air. His hand clutched Captain's fur, and he thought of Michael, thought of Margaret, thought of all the ways he'd failed the people who loved him. Maybe death was just going home to them. Maybe it would finally stop hurting. Then, through the murky water, Will saw movement. Something massive was approaching, gliding through the river with ancient, predatory grace. 12 feet long, maybe more, its prehistoric form unmistakable even in the clouded water. An alligator, of course. The blood had called it, dinner bell ringing in the depths. Will's oxygen-starved brain accepted this final cruelty with something like relief. At least it would be quick. At least Captain wouldn't have to watch him drown slowly. He closed his eyes and waited for the teeth. But instead of tearing pain, he felt pressure, firm, broad pressure beneath him, lifting. His eyes snapped open. The alligator's massive head had come up under his body, its snout acting as a platform, pushing him upward. They broke the surface together, Will and Captain gasping in desperate lungfuls of air. Will coughed, water streaming from his nose and mouth, certain he was hallucinating. But the alligator remained beneath him, solid and real, keeping him afloat like some kind of impossible raft. Captain still gripped his collar, paddling weakly now, his strength nearly spent. Will blinked water from his eyes and looked at the creature's face, inches from his own. There, on the snout, weathered but unmistakable, was a V-shaped notch carved into the scales. Moses? The word came out as a croak, but something wasn't quite right. The size was correct for 15 years of growth, but the pattern of scales around the eyes was slightly different than he remembered. The shape of the head was subtly wrong. This wasn't Moses. This couldn't be Moses. Then, from deeper water, another alligator surfaced. Larger, older, moving with the slow deliberation of great age. This one was at least 14 feet long, her body thick and powerful. And on her snout, worn but clear, was the exact V-notch Will remembered carving all those years ago. Moses, the mother. The younger alligator beneath Will was her offspring, her child, grown large and strong. Will's mind reeled. Moses had survived, had thrived, had raised young in this river, and somehow, impossibly, she had taught them about him, about the human who had saved her, about debts and memory and gratitude. Moses moved alongside her offspring, her ancient yellow eyes meeting Will's. There was intelligence in that gaze, recognition that transcended species. She remembered him. After 15 years, through all the seasons and changes, she remembered the man who had freed her from the net and healed her wound. Together, mother and child began pushing Will toward shore. Moses used her snout to guide them, her offspring provided flotation, and they moved through the water with coordinated purpose. But the chain, the cursed chain, was still pulling, still tightening with every movement. They managed only a few feet before Will screamed, the trap grinding deeper into his leg bone. They couldn't reach the shore. The chain was too short, the anchor too heavy. Moses stopped, assessing with whatever passed for thought in her reptilian brain. Then she dove, her massive body disappearing beneath the surface. Will panicked. No, wait! But she was gone. Underwater sounds reached him, muffled but distinct. Crunch. Crunch, crunch. Metal grinding against prehistoric teeth. Moses was attacking the chain, biting through the rusted links with a jaw pressure that could crush a cow's skull. Will could only imagine the pain. Old chain was often sharp, cutting, dangerous even to creatures armored in scales. 30 seconds that felt like hours, then the chain went slack. The terrible downward pull released. Moses had bitten through the weakened links, freeing Will from the anchor, even though the trap remained clamped to his leg. She surfaced, and Will saw blood seeping from the corners of her mouth where the chain had cut her. She had hurt herself to save him. The parallel was not lost on Will. He had cleaned her wound 15 years ago, and now she bled to free him from his chains. Her offspring pushed Will toward the shallows. Moses swam beside them, protective, watching. Captain paddled alongside, never releasing his grip on Will's collar, refusing to let go even now that help had arrived. Will's hands found mud, the shallow bank. He crawled forward on his elbows, dragging his ruined leg, the trap still attached, 40 pounds of iron and agony. Captain scrambled up beside him, collapsing in the mud, his chest heaving like a broken bellows. The old dog had given everything, pushed his aging body past every reasonable limit, and now lay gasping. Will collapsed on the bank, half in and half out of the water, blood still flowing from his leg. He rolled onto his side to look back at the river. Moses and her offspring watched from a few feet away, their bodies mostly submerged, only their eyes and the tops of their heads visible. "Thank you," Will whispered, his voice raw. "God, thank you." Moses dipped her head. It might have been a nod, it might have been nothing, but Will chose to believe in the former. She had paid back a 15-year-old debt. She had remembered kindness and returned it when it mattered most. Then, crashing through the brush, came the sound of running footsteps. Multiple people, coming fast. Raymond Sutton burst from the tree line, a rifle in his hands but not raised, his face contorted in horror. "Jesus Christ, Will, what happened?" Will, dazed and bleeding, could barely process the question. "Ray, did you—" "No." Ray dropped the rifle and ran to Will's side. "God, no. I came to stop this. Elena told me this morning what she did. She set a trap. I've been running for an hour trying to find you before—" "Dad, wait!" Elena crashed through the underbrush behind her father, her phone in her hand, her face stricken with guilt and terror. She saw Will on the ground, the blood, the trap, and fell to her knees. "Oh my God! Oh my God! No, no, no!" Ray grabbed his daughter's shoulders, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "You said you set a warning, a fake trap to scare him. You lied?" Eleanor was sobbing, hyperventilating. "I found an old trap in Granddad's shed. I thought it was broken, rusted through. I just wanted to scare him into leaving so we could get the money for Margaret. I didn't think it would, actually. I didn't mean to kill anyone." "An old trap?" Ray's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Elena, those old gator traps. They were designed to hold a 500-pound alligator. They were designed to drown. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Eleanor's hands shook as she held up her phone. "I called 911. Ambulance is coming. 5 minutes, they said. 5 minutes." Ray turned back to Will, his weathered face crumbling. "I told her you deserved to suffer. I poisoned her with my hate. This is my fault." Will, fighting to stay conscious, reached out with a bloody hand. "Not your fault. Mine. I'm the one who glorified war. You were right. I sent our boys to die." "No." Ray gripped Will's hand. "We sent them. The whole damn system sent them. Politicians sent them. I'm so tired of being angry, Will. So tired of hurting." Captain dragged himself closer to Will, pressing his body against his master's chest. The dog's heart beat against Will's ribs, fast, exhausted, but alive. They'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. In the water, Moses and her offspring slipped beneath the surface and disappeared, their mission complete. The ambulance arrived with Sheriff Tom Brady right behind it. Paramedics rushed to Will's side with practiced efficiency, assessing the trap still clamped to his mangled leg. The lead medic, a young woman with steady hands, looked at the mechanism and swore under her breath. "We need bolt cutters. This thing is ancient, but it's built like a tank." She started an IV line in Will's arm, pushing fluids and pain medication while her partner worked on the trap. Captain refused to move, staying pressed against Will's side until the sheriff gently pulled the exhausted dog back. "I need statements," Tom said, his weathered face grim as he took in the scene. The blood, the trap, the visible chain leading into the water. What the hell happened here? Elena stood before anyone else could speak, her voice hollow. "I set the trap. It's my fault. I did this." Tom's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to his notepad. "Ma'am, you understand what you're saying. I set it 3 days ago. I found it in my grandfather's old shed, one of those illegal alligator traps from before they were protected. I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought it was too rusted to work properly. I just wanted to scare Colonel Brennan into selling his land so we could afford my daughter's treatment. I never meant for it to actually catch him. I never meant for it to work." The paramedics had the trap cut open now, carefully extracting Will's leg. The damage was catastrophic. Deep lacerations, possible bone fractures, definitely nerve damage. They worked quickly, applying pressure bandages and a temporary splint. Sheriff Brady wrote deliberately, his pen scratching across the page. "Eleanor Sutton, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder." "No." Will's voice was weak but clear. "You're not." Tom looked up sharply. "Will, I can't just ignore this." "She admitted to setting a trap that nearly killed you." "It was an accident." Will coughed, tasting copper. "Old poacher trap. I stepped wrong. That's my statement." "Will, I was there when she confessed." "Your memory against mine, Tom. And I'm a 72-year-old man with documented PTSD and a traumatic brain injury from service. You think any prosecutor is going to take my testimony as reliable?" Will's eyes locked on the sheriff's. "It was an accident. Case closed." Eleanor collapsed to her knees in the mud. "Why? Why would you protect me? I almost killed you." Will tried to sit up, but the paramedics pushed him back down. "Because your daughter's name is Margaret. And my Margaret would never forgive me if I put her namesake's mother in prison." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Ray stood frozen, watching this exchange, something breaking and reforming behind his eyes. "We need to transport now," the lead paramedic said. "He's lost a lot of blood." "We need surgery within the hour, or he could lose the leg." They loaded Will onto the stretcher. Captain tried to follow, but a paramedic blocked him. "Sorry, sir, no animals in the ambulance." "He goes, or I don't." Will's voice was steel beneath the weakness. The paramedics looked at each other, then at the old German shepherd, standing protectively beside the stretcher, mud-covered and exhausted, but utterly devoted. The lead medic sighed. "Get the dog a blanket. He rides in back." As they lifted the stretcher, Will caught one last glimpse of the river. The water was still, undisturbed, as if the alligators had never been there at all. But he knew what he'd seen. He knew what they'd done. Moses had returned his kindness after 15 years, had taught her offspring the shape of mercy, had proven that some debts transcend the boundaries of species and time. The ambulance doors closed. Captain lay on the floor beside Will's stretcher, his head resting on his paws, his brown eyes never leaving his master's face. Will reached down and touched the dog's head with trembling fingers. "Good boy," he whispered. "Such a good boy. You saved me. You always save me." As the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, Ray and Elena stood in the blood-stained mud. The trap lay discarded, its jaws still spread wide, rust and blood mixing on the ancient metal. "Your mother would be ashamed of me," Ray said quietly. "Dad, I taught you to hate. I taught you that pain justifies cruelty. I taught you that good people become acceptable targets if they stand between you and what you want." His voice cracked. "That's not who I was. That's not who Jacob would want me to be." Eleanor touched her father's arm. "Jacob would want you to heal." "How? How do I heal when my boy is gone?" "When I turned my own daughter into someone who sets traps for innocent men. The same way Colonel Brennan does. One day at a time, with people who love you." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "Little Margaret needs her grandpa. She needs you, healthy, not eaten alive by bitterness. Ray stared at the river where Will had nearly drowned, where alligators had performed an impossible rescue, where Grace had manifested in the most unlikely forms. Will could have sent you to prison. He chose mercy instead. That's a gift we don't deserve. Then maybe, Eleanor said softly, we need to become people who do deserve it. Sheriff Brady approached them, his expression unreadable. I'll need full statements from both of you. And Eleanor, even though Will's protecting you, this isn't over. You're getting off easy because of his grace. Don't make me regret going along with this. I won't, Eleanor promised. I swear on my daughter's life, I won't waste this second chance. The sheriff nodded slowly, then looked at the trap, the blood, the chain still trailing into the water. Someone's going to have to explain to me how an old man and an older dog survived this. Because what I'm seeing here doesn't make sense. Ray glanced at the river, where ripples still disturbed the surface. Maybe some things aren't meant to make sense, Tom. Maybe some things are just meant to remind us that the world still has room for miracles. 2 days later, Will woke in Charleston Medical Center, with his leg in a cast suspended from a traction device, IV lines running into both arms, and monitors beeping steadily beside his bed. The first thing he felt was warmth across his feet. Captain, somehow still allowed to stay, lay at the end of the bed, despite every hospital regulation ever written. A nurse entered, saw Will's eyes open, and smiled. About time. Your dog's been driving everyone crazy. He growls at anyone who tries to make him leave. Good boy, Will murmured, his throat dry as sand. The doctor arrived within minutes, a silver-haired surgeon with kind eyes. Colonel Brennan, you're remarkably lucky. The trap missed your major arteries by millimeters. You'll walk again, but you're looking at 6 months of physical therapy, minimum. And that water wasn't exactly sterile. We're fighting infection aggressively. How long here? A week, maybe more. We need to monitor for sepsis. The doctor paused. You've got visitors who've been camping in the waiting room, a Ray Sutton and his daughter. Should I send them away? No, Will said. Let them in. But before Ray and Elena could enter, a nurse brought Will a plastic bag containing his belongings from the river, his muddy backpack, Michael's dog tags, and miraculously intact, Margaret's diary. The pages were waterlogged but readable. As Will carefully peeled them apart, an envelope fell into his lap. Sealed. The ink hadn't run. His hands shook as he opened it. Margaret's handwriting, clear and beloved. My dearest Will, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're probably drowning in grief. I know you. You're thinking about Michael every second. You're blaming yourself. You're alone. But I need you to know something. I've been preparing for this. I set up accounts you don't know about. Over 20 years, I saved $250,000. It's in a trust at First South Bank. Mr. Henderson has the papers. If I die, and if you ever need it, it's yours. But Will, I don't want you to use it to hide. Use it to live. Michael would want you to help people. I want you to help people. You were always a protector. Be that again. Also, I've been visiting the marsh. I found Moses. She has babies. I've been tagging them with the wildlife conservation group I joined last year. They know our scent now. If you ever need them, I think they'll remember. Animals are smarter than we think. Love transcends species, Will. It transcends death. I'll always be with you in every act of kindness you choose. Now go live. Love forever, Margaret. Will read it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Margaret had known. She'd known she was dying, known he would fall apart, known he would need a purpose beyond grief. She'd saved money for this moment. She'd even arranged for the alligators to know him, had been preparing for the impossible rescue that had just saved his life. You sneaky, beautiful woman, he whispered to the letter. His phone was in the bag, miraculously still working. With shaking fingers, he called the number Elena had given him. She answered on the first ring. Colonel Brennan? How's your daughter? The question came before anything else. Elena's voice broke. You almost died and you're asking about her? How is she? Not good. We're out of options. The experimental treatment cost $200,000. Without it, she couldn't finish the sentence. I'm going to lose her, Colonel, just like you lost Michael, just like my dad lost Jacob. Will took a breath, feeling Margaret's presence like a hand on his shoulder. What if I told you I could pay for it, all of it? Silence on the other end. Then, what? My wife left money I didn't know about. She saved it for something important, for someone who needed it. Your daughter needs it. His voice strengthened. I'll pay the full treatment cost. $200,000. Elena made a sound between a sob and a gasp. I can't. You can't. Your land. You'll have to sell. I'm keeping my land. Margaret left enough for your daughter's treatment and for Ray's memorial. She planned for this. She knew I'd need to help someone. She knew that's how I'd survive losing her, by becoming what she always was, someone who saved things. I don't deserve this, Elena whispered. None of us deserve grace. That's what makes it grace. When Ray and Elena entered his room an hour later, Elena could barely look at him. Ray stood at the doorway, his face a landscape of emotions he didn't have words for. Sit down, both of you, Will said. Ray moved to the chair beside the bed while Elena hovered near the door, her guilt a palpable thing. I have something to show you. Will handed Ray the diary entry about Margaret visiting Sarah, Ray's late wife, in her final days. Ray read it, his weathered hands trembling, tears falling onto the page. She was there. Margaret was with Sarah when I couldn't be. I didn't know. I never knew. She forgave you before you even needed forgiving, Will said. Now I'm asking you, forgive yourself. Help me build something good from all this pain. Your memorial for Jacob and Michael and all the others. We're building it. Together. Will, I don't deserve. Neither do I. But Margaret thought we both did. She saved money for this. For healing. For turning our sons' deaths into something that helps others. Will extended his hand. Partners? Ray gripped it, his voice thick with emotion. Brothers, like we should have stayed after the war. Eleanor finally approached, her eyes red from crying. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you're doing for my daughter. Just teach her about grace, Will said simply. Teach her that mercy matters more than revenge. That's payment enough. Captain's tail thumped against the hospital bed, and for the first time in 5 years since Michael's death, Will felt something that wasn't just survival. He felt purpose. He felt Margaret's hand in all of this, orchestrating from beyond death itself, teaching him that love doesn't end when the heart stops beating. It just transforms, becomes something bigger than one person, becomes a legacy that saves lives years after you're gone. Margaret had saved Moses. Moses had saved Will. Will would save little Margaret. And that little girl would grow up knowing that grace exists, that mercy matters, that love transcends every boundary humans try to put on it. The circle was complete. 6 months later, spring arrived in the South Carolina Lowcountry with an explosion of color that Margaret would have loved. The azaleas bloomed pink and white, the dogwoods spread their branches like benedictions, and the marsh grass turned that particular shade of green that only comes after winter's surrender. The memorial dedication drew over 200 people, veterans, Gold Star families, town members, reporters, and curious onlookers who'd heard about the old colonel who'd nearly died and chose forgiveness instead of vengeance. The structure stood on the northern section of Will's land, the part he'd donated while keeping the sacred river section for himself. The Margaret Brennan Memorial Garden and Veterans Healing Center was everything Ray had dreamed and more. A curved wall bore the names of fallen soldiers from 3 generations of war, Michael Brennan and Jacob Sutton among hundreds of others, their names carved deep so time couldn't erase them. Around the memorial, Margaret's beloved community garden flourished with vegetables and flowers, tended by veteran volunteers who found peace in growing things. The therapy center offered free counseling for veterans and their families, funded through a partnership with Charleston Medical Center, Walking trails wound through protected wetlands where alligators basked and herons fished, untouched by development. Will sat in his wheelchair, still recovering, still learning to walk again with a cane, with Captain beside him. The old German shepherd had gone even grayer in the past 6 months, his arthritis worse, his breathing labored, but his tail still thumped when little Margaret ran up to them. The child looked transformed. Her hair had grown back in soft brown curls, her cheeks had color, and her eyes sparkled with the particular joy of someone who'd been given back their life. She wore a yellow dress and carried a single white rose. "Grandpa Will," she hugged him carefully, mindful of his healing leg. "Can I put the flower by Michael's name?" "Of course, sweetheart." She ran to the wall, stood on tiptoe, and placed the rose at the base of the carved name. She touched the letters with small fingers, tracing each one. "Thank you for sharing him with me," she whispered to the stone. Ray approached the podium, his limp less pronounced than it had been, his face showing lines of peace rather than bitterness. He wore his dress uniform, medals catching the sunlight. "I spent 5 years drowning in hatred," Ray began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "I blamed everyone for my son's death, the military, the government, my fellow veterans, even myself. But mostly, I blamed my friend Will Brennan, because he'd encouraged our sons to serve, just like we had. I thought if I could just make him hurt the way I hurt, maybe my pain would ease." He paused, his throat working. "It didn't. Hatred doesn't heal wounds, it just digs them deeper. It poisoned me, and it poisoned my daughter until she almost became something she's not, until a good man almost died because of the bitterness I'd cultivated." Ray's eyes found Will in the crowd. "But that man, Colonel William Brennan, showed me what real strength looks like. It's not revenge. It's grace. It's choosing mercy when justice would be easier. It's building something beautiful from unbearable loss." He gestured to the memorial behind him. "This center exists because of Will's wife, Margaret, who saved money her whole life, knowing it would be needed for something important. It exists because Will chose to honor her vision instead of his own pain. It exists because sometimes the greatest memorial to the dead is serving the living." Eleanor stood beside her father now, little Margaret holding her hand. "Our family owes Colonel Brennan a debt we can never repay. He saved my daughter's life. He saved my father's soul. He saved me from becoming someone my mother would have been ashamed of." The crowd applauded as Will was helped to the podium. He gripped his cane, Captain pressed against his legs for support, emotional more than physical. "Margaret always said, 'We're not measured by what we keep, but by what we give,'" Will began, his voice steady despite the emotion. "Today we give back to those who gave everything. This isn't just a memorial to the dead. It's a promise to the living that their sacrifice meant something, that their families won't be forgotten, that healing is possible even after unbearable loss." He looked at the wall of names, found Michael's, found Jacob's. "My son would be proud. Jacob Sutton would be proud. And I think I'm finally proud too. Not of war, but of what comes after. The hard work of healing. The harder work of forgiveness." He unveiled the main plaque, "In memory of Margaret Brennan, who taught us that love builds bridges even death cannot break." After the ceremony, Will made his way slowly to the river, Captain limping beside him. They sat on the old fallen cypress tree, now incorporated into the nature preserve. The afternoon sun painted everything gold. Will pulled out Margaret's ashes urn. He'd retrieved it from the river bottom weeks later, still intact. He opened it, scattering the remaining ashes into the water one final time. "We did it, Mags. Your memorial's real. Little Margaret's alive and thriving. Ray's healing. Elena's healing. Even I'm healing, though some days it's harder than others." Ripples disturbed the water's surface. Moses emerged slowly, her movements more deliberate than before, age weighing on even prehistoric creatures. Behind her swam 3 younger alligators, her grandchildren, now nearly full grown. Will smiled. "Hey, old girl." "You're a grandma again." Moses floated closer than she ever had until Will could have reached out and touched her. He did, carefully, his hand resting on her snout where the V-shaped notch remained visible after all these years. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just regarded him with those ancient yellow eyes that had seen him at his worst and saved him anyway. "You saved my life, just like I saved yours 15 years ago. Guess we're even." Moses opened her mouth slightly, and Will saw something gleaming inside. She nudged it toward him with her tongue. Michael's dog tags, lost in the drowning, somehow kept and now returned. Will's hands shook as he retrieved them, the metal worn smooth by water and time. "How did you know what these meant?" Moses dipped her head in what might have been a nod, might have been nothing, but Will chose to believe in the former. She'd kept his son's tags. She'd understood they were important. She'd returned them when he was finally ready to receive them. "Thank you," Will whispered, "for everything." Moses and her grandchildren slipped beneath the surface one last time, and Will knew with certainty he wouldn't see them again. Their debt was paid. The circle was complete. Moses would live out her days in this protected marsh, safe from hunters and traps, raising her descendants in peace. Little Margaret's voice called from up the path. "Grandpa Will, come see the garden." Will clutched Michael's tags and stood with effort, Captain beside him. Both of them old and damaged, but still here, still fighting, still choosing life despite everything. They walked together toward the sound of children laughing, toward the smell of growing things, toward Elena and Ray and Sheriff Tom and all the people who'd become Will's chosen family in the aftermath of tragedy. The marsh sang its evening song. The sun dipped toward the horizon. And for the first time since Michael's death, since Margaret's death, since the trap had tried to claim him, Will Brennan felt something beyond mere survival. He felt joy. 1 year later, Will stood at the river at sunrise, no longer needing his cane, Captain beside him, slower now, grayer, breathing with difficulty, but present. They'd come for their morning ritual. "You don't have long, do you, boy?" Will scratched behind Captain's ears. The vet had said weeks, not months. Will had known this day was coming since the moment he'd taken Michael's dog into his home. Captain's tail gave a weak thump. "You completed your mission, soldier. Michael would be so proud. You kept me alive when I wanted to die. You taught me that love is worth the pain of losing it." That evening, on the porch with the sunset painting the sky in Margaret's favorite colors, Captain laid his head in Will's lap one final time. Ray sat nearby, a silent witness to this goodbye. "Thank you," Will whispered, tears streaming freely. "Thank you for saving me. Rest now, brave boy. Tell Michael I'm okay. Tell him I found family again. Tell him I'm living, not just surviving." Captain's eyes closed peacefully. His breathing slowed and then stopped. He passed quietly in Will's arms. No pain, no fear, just the knowledge that his mission was complete. They buried him near Margaret's garden, his headstone reading, "Captain, loyal friend, devoted protector, Michael's final gift, mission complete." 3 months after that, little Margaret, now 8 years old and fully healthy, arrived at Will's cabin with her mother. In her arms squirmed an 8-week-old German Shepherd puppy. "His name is Scout," she announced. "He's from the Veteran Service Dog Program. He needs a foster home while he's training. Will you help?" Will looked at the puppy, felt grief for Captain and joy for new life warring in his chest. The puppy licked his face, tail wagging with boundless enthusiasm. "Scout's a good name," Will said, his voice thick. "Welcome home." They walked to the river together, Will, Ray, Elena, little Margaret, and Scout. Moses surfaced one last time, ancient and slow, her family surrounding her. 4 generations of alligator, 4 generations of humans, all of them saved by love, by mercy, by the choice to transform pain into beauty. Will looked at the sunrise, at his chosen family, at the puppy who would carry on Captain's legacy, at the marsh that had witnessed miracles. "Life isn't about avoiding pain," he said, echoing Margaret's wisdom. "It's about transforming it into something beautiful." And there, in the golden light of a South Carolina morning, surrounded by the people he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back, William Brennan understood that Margaret had been right all along. Love doesn't end when the heart stops beating. It just becomes something bigger than one person. It becomes grace. It becomes salvation. It becomes the story we tell to remind ourselves that even in our darkest moments, even when we're drowning, even when traps close around us and pull us under, there is always someone swimming toward us, always someone willing to lift us up, always a way back to the light. Sometimes we think we're too old to start over, too broken to be fixed, too alone to matter anymore. Colonel Will Brennan thought the same thing. He'd lost his son to war, his wife to cancer, and nearly lost himself to grief. He was drowning on dry land until the day he literally drowned in the river, and discovered that 15 years earlier, he'd saved an alligator's life, and she remembered. That alligator saved him back, proving that kindness never dies. It just waits for the right moment to return. Will learned that chosen family can be stronger than blood, that grace matters more than revenge, and that it's never too late to transform pain into purpose. He built a memorial garden from his ashes of loss. He saved a little girl's life with money his wife had secretly saved for exactly that moment. He forgave the people who'd tried to kill him because mercy heals what justice cannot. This story asks you, what act of kindness have you given that might come back to save you when you need it most? And what pain are you carrying that could be transformed into something beautiful? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.